In the age of steel and shadow, when Europe was a tapestry of endless war, one name was whispered in fear from the frozen fields of the Netherlands to the sun-baked plains of Italy. They were not just soldiers. They were a specter on the battlefield, a force of nature bound by iron discipline. They were the Spanish Tercio. For 80 years, they fought, they bled, and they died in a single, unending conflict, a war so long it seemed to defy time itself. This is the story of the Cursed Knights, the brotherhood that became a legend, and the unbreakable will that forged an empire. The story begins in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. Spain, newly unified, was a nation hungry for power. To project its might across Europe, it needed an army unlike any the world had ever seen. The old ways of medieval warfare, of chaotic charges and noble duels, were dying. A new era of gunpowder and discipline was dawning, and Spain would be its master. From this crucible of innovation, the Tercio was born. Imagine an organism, a single living creature made of thousands of men, steel, and fire. At its heart was a dense forest of pikes, long spears that formed an impenetrable hedge against charging cavalry. Around this core, swordsmen, nimble and deadly, stood ready to exploit any break in the enemy line. And on the flanks, the arquebusiers, wielding the thunderous power of gunpowder, unleashed volleys of lead that could shatter formations and morale alike. This combination of pike, shot, and sword was revolutionary. The Tercio moved with a terrifying precision, a disciplined machine that could adapt, pivot, and crush armies many times its size. They were professionals in an age of mercenaries, career soldiers who dedicated their lives to the art of war. Their training was brutal, their loyalty to the crown absolute, and their faith unshakable. They were the sharpest edge of the Spanish Empire, and soon they would be sent into the heart of a storm that would rage for nearly a century. In 1568, the Low Countries erupted in rebellion against Spanish rule. What began as a protest against religious persecution and high taxes spiraled into a brutal 80-year struggle for independence. This was the Dutch Revolt, and it would become the Tercio's defining crucible. Into this land of winding canals, flooded fields, and fortified cities marched the veterans of Italy and the Mediterranean. They came to crush the rebellion, but found a nation that would not yield. The war in the Netherlands was a new kind of hell. It was not a war of grand, open battles, but of grueling sieges, desperate skirmishes, and endless attrition. The Tercios marched through frozen marshlands where one wrong step meant drowning in icy water. They laid siege to cities that held out 4 months, their walls spitting cannon fire day and night. They fought in the claustrophobic darkness of tunnels dug beneath enemy ramparts and in the blinding smoke of burning towns. To the Dutch rebels, these Spanish soldiers were more than just an enemy. They were an omen, a curse upon the land. Wherever the distinctive beat of their drums was heard, death and devastation followed. They were called the Cursed Knights, an unstoppable force that seemed to emerge from the mists of the battlefield, fight with inhuman resolve, and disappear again, leaving only silence and sorrow in their wake. Legends grew around them, tales whispered in taverns and around campfires. Stories of men who held the line against impossible odds, who prayed in the eerie quiet before a dawn assault, their faces illuminated by the dim light of a lantern, knowing they might not see another sunrise. The heart of the Tercio's legend was its iconic square formation. When threatened by cavalry, the pikemen would form a dense hedgehog of steel, a fortress of spears that no horse would dare to charge. From within this protective square, the arquebusiers would deliver devastating, rotating volleys of fire, a tactic known as the snail formation. One line would fire, retreat to the back to reload, and another would step forward. It was a continuous, rolling thunder that broke the will of even the bravest attackers. On the battlefield, to face a Tercio square was to face a death sentence. But this 80-year war took a toll that no ledger could ever calculate. The cost was measured in blood, in souls, in generations of men consumed by the conflict. A soldier who joined the Tercios in the Netherlands as a young man could fight for 20 years and still see no end in sight. Sons followed fathers into the same regiments, taking up the pikes and arquebuses of those who had fallen. The Tercio became an entity that outlived its own members. It was eternal, a river of soldiers flowing into the meat grinder of the Dutch Revolt. The letters and diaries of these men paint a grim picture. They speak of constant hunger, of pay that was months or even years late, leading to infamous mutinies where the Tercios would seize a city and hold it for ransom. They speak of the gnawing exhaustion, the cold that seeped into their bones, and the ghosts of comrades who fell in forgotten skirmishes. Yet, through it all, their pride and discipline rarely wavered. They were the Tercios, the finest soldiers in the world, and they would not break. They believed God and the king were on their side, and this faith sustained them through horrors that would have shattered lesser men. For 80 years they held the line. For 80 years, they were the symbol of Spanish might, the boogeyman of Protestant Europe. But empires wane, and even the most legendary warriors cannot fight time forever. The world was changing. New tactics were emerging, and Spain, drained by a century of constant warfare, was beginning to falter. The stage was set for a final, tragic act. The year is 1643, the place, Rocroy, a fortress town in northern France. A new power is rising in Europe. France, led by the brilliant Duke of Enghien. He aims to break the myth of Spanish invincibility once and for all. Facing him is an army of Spanish veterans, the last of the great Tercios. They are outnumbered, their commanders are old, and their empire is in decline. But they are still the Tercios. As the battle rages, the Spanish army begins to crumble around them. Their cavalry is scattered, their flanks collapse. Soon, the last Tercio squares stand alone on the field, surrounded by the entire French army. They are islands of defiance in a sea of enemies. The French cavalry charges again and again, only to be broken against the forest of pikes. French artillery pounds the squares, tearing horrific gaps in their ranks, but the survivors simply close ranks, stepping over the bodies of their comrades to fill the line. The Duke of Enghien, awestruck by their courage, offers them terms of surrender to march off the field with their flags and weapons. An honor reserved for the bravest of foes, but the Tercios, proud to the last, refuse. They will not surrender. They will die where they stand as Tercios. The final French assault comes. It is a storm of cannon fire, musket volleys, and cold steel. The last squares are engulfed in smoke and fire. The cursed knights of the Netherlands, the men who had fought for 80 years, finally meet their end. The Battle of Rocroy was more than a defeat. It was the end of an era. The fall of the Tercios symbolized the fall of Spanish military supremacy. The legend was broken. The unstoppable force had been stopped. But the story of the Tercio did not end in the mud of Rocroy. It became a myth, a testament to human endurance, discipline, and the unbreakable bonds of a brotherhood forged in the crucible of endless war.